Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode. I am your host, Drew Sample, and joined once again by Andy Evans and our favorite beat writer from the Buckeye beat, Mr. Dillon Davis. Welcome to the show. Big game yesterday. OSU looked very dominant, especially defensively, and we'll kind of get into it. I guess, Andy, you want to give a quick your quick rundown of what you saw in the game yesterday?
Last 2 weeks has Ohio State started slow. First half didn't go exactly as Buckeye Nation wanted to see, but in the end, how did they finish? They finished with a bang. And to have allowed Iowa and Michigan State, who weren't prolific offenses, come into the game, but had pretty good defenses, especially yesterday in Iowa, to put up over 30 points against both Michigan State and Iowa and hold them to a touchdown. I don't see how right now we could be any happier with the result at what we just saw in the last two games. I'm pleased. Pleased as punch, as the kids say. I don't think they say that. In fact, I don't think we even said it when I was growing up.
I've never heard that in my life.
I've never heard pleased as punch, but I like it. Dillon, what were your?
I am pleased as punch. Yeah, Dillon, come on, man, hit us with your thoughts, baby.
I think my biggest takeaway is that, I come away from this game feeling confident that Ohio State's going to be able to run the football against anybody they play. And that's such a comforting thing. Obviously for that coaching staff, for Buckeye fans, yesterday was a big challenge physically, up front for Ohio State and on both sides of the ball. And they passed that test with flying colors. They ran the ball, for 200 yards and limited Caleb Johnson to 86 yards on 14 carries, and some of that was against the backup defense. Jermaine Matthews misses that tackle on a long touchdown, so that inflates those numbers. So, I came away from this game saying, man, Ohio State's going to be able to run the ball against anybody. And that kudos to that offensive line, because I think by and large it was the biggest question mark for everybody coming into the season. There weren't a lot of question marks, but certainly that offensive line was one of them. And they're really starting to answer those questions, even, after week one, in that Akron game, it was still kind of, wait and see. Ohio State's really starting to answer check that box on the offensive line, and we know what they have at running back. So that's really comforting for Buckeye fans, especially with what's on deck next week at Oregon, to know that your running games travel. If you have it, they travel, and that running game's going to travel. And that's a really good place to start, and certainly on defensively, what they did to Caleb Johnson. Now that's a one-dimensional Iowa offense, so it's probably a lot easier to, slow Caleb Johnson down with no fear about getting burned in the back end. But still, for what the challenge was last week, that great performance yesterday, it was a great performance by Ohio State up front on both sides of the ball, and that's it all starts there. So that's encouraging.
Yeah, my kind of takeaway was it was closer. I think everybody thought I was out at the tailgate, my feet on the ground there, and everybody kind of thought OSU was going to do what they did in the third quarter and the second quarter. So I think there was some concern, but Iowa's a tough team. They always play us tough. Even when we have great teams, they come and play us defensively. They've been in the Big Ten championship, I think, the last 3 of the last 4 years at least.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and they always play tough. They don't, and now they actually have a decent quarterback from Michigan, and lost to Iowa State, which I think it kind of goes against. I know they're not. He's not that good, but it was nice to see. Will Howard was. I don't want to say he was struggling, but he did miss some open receivers. And I think too, it is an adjustment. I think playing in the Big Ten versus playing in the Big 12 defensively, especially against an Iowa defense. But I like the way our defense really took over in the third quarter, and then our offense just started doing what it can do. And I think that was a nice. I was literally having a conversation with Will Howard's not having his best game right now. We just scored 21 points in like 5 minutes.
Make no mistake about the slow start. And it was a slow start, but that game could have very well ended up, 51-0 or 51-7 or whatever the case may be, because if they just capitalized on opportunity in the first half, they would have put up a 24, 30 spot in the first half as well. You know, they just the turnovers and obviously the questionable fourth and two play call, you know, robbed them of having more points. So I mean, like I get like, you know, from a scoreboard perspective, and that's obviously the end all be all. It seemed like a slow start, but at the same time, Ohio State moved the ball in the first half just like they did in the second half. It was just a matter of, you know, not shooting themselves in the foot. So I mean, I you know, in my opinion, for you know, for 4 quarters, Ohio State, you know, imposed their will on Iowa for all 4 quarters, first half and second half. Even the first half didn't, you know, suggest it on the scoreboard. So I thought it was a thoroughly dominant effort from Ohio State.
Definitely. Andy, who were you kind of most impressed with in this game? What did you, I mean, were there any players that stood out that took over? I mean, Emeka Egbuka really kind of had a standout game from what I saw offensively.
Yeah, 9 catches, 70, let me
71.
see here. 71 yards, 9 catches, 71 yards, 3 touchdowns. First ever 3-touchdown game in his career. I was obviously, you know, you got to be impressed with that. Funny enough, though, he was second in yards to the man, Jeremiah, who had 4 catches for 89 yards and a touchdown.
A disgusting one-handed catch that he just pulled out of the air.
Here we go again with,
push the
these
guy.
One-handed circus catches are now just becoming, and then he gives a little like, get off me, man. You know, get off me, son. You ain't got me on this one. But, you know, it's hard to pinpoint one specific performance. I mean, you look at the running game, you know, Quinshawn, 13 carries, 78 yards, no touchdowns. Trey, 11 carries, 61 yards. They both still went for over 5 yards a carry. You know, Will ends up with 10 carries for 28 yards, has the only rushing touchdown of the game. And that was the first rushing touchdown that Iowa had given up all year. From an overall team aspect, though, I think that's just what I was most impressed with. You know, you guys just basically touched on all of it. Here's the one stat of the game that I said beforehand in the quick hit pregame preview I did yesterday, that it could come down to the red zone, because Iowa's red zone defense was disgusting. They led the country with only 3 trips allowed the entire season up until yesterday. 3 stinking trips. Now, all 3 of those trips did result in touchdowns against them, but still, they had only allowed 3 times for an opposing offense to get into the red zone. Yesterday, Ohio State, 5 trips into the red zone, and all 5 were touchdowns. So that right there impressed me more than anything. Dillon, you talked about the rushing stats. You know, I just went over the individual stats, but you pile them all up, 203 yards on the ground against a rushing defense that was one of the best in the country, only allowing 61 yards a game. It was the first team to run for triple digits against them all season long, and they ran for over 200 yards. So those 2 aspects of the game were the most impressive to me. So I didn't really have a breakout standout star. I suppose Mech would be the guy that you would have to pinpoint and saying, yeah, he had the best individual performance. Jeremiah, definitely a very, very, very close second for me. But even defensively, you know, you look at some of the guys that had good games. You know, you got 4 sacks yesterday. 2 of them were strip sacks. Ty Hamilton got in there with a strip sack. Jack, our boy from Pickerington North, got in there. He only had 3 tackles in the game, only 3, but he had 1.5 sacks, and one of them was a strip sack. So defensively, they were on it. Just an overall solid performance, like you guys just said. I was impressed just all the way around.
I think another interesting stat, because I'm just looking over, each team only had 1 penalty.
Yeah, very clean game.
Pretty clean game.
Dillon, you said at one point, you were like the first quarter ended, and you were like, a very fast first quarter comes to an end. Because Iowa was running the ball, chewing the clock. I mean, heck, at halftime, Iowa actually had like a minute longer possession than Ohio State, like a little over 15 minutes. Ohio State had over 14 minutes. They were both running the ball, and they weren't getting penalized. Like neither team was getting penalized. It went like that.
Yeah. Well, I think that, I mean, you know, it's interesting, guys. I feel like OSU had a very dominant performance. And I think it was something that we were hoping to see. We're all glad to see it. But then, man, around college football, There were just some
Upset Saturday,
crazy,
baby.
crazy games. Texas A&M, who barely beat BG at home, got blown out, or they lost to Notre Dame at home. There's all this, they paid that coach $70 million and fired him. They've been kind of this overrated thing. They kicked Missouri's butt yesterday, 41-10 out of nowhere, and I thought they were kind of overrated. I thought that game would swing a different way. But I mean, the biggest one, Vanderbilt upsetting Alabama after that big emotional game. Tennessee getting upset by Arkansas. Um, Before I went to bed, I was pretty sure the U was, I mean, they were just getting disrespected by California, going for it in fourth in their own territory, making touchdowns. And then another crazy game. They came back. When Dillon got on the call, I was watching the highlights because I went to bed thinking, oh my gosh, there's another one. And then I was like, wait, they came back. Um, but I think like overall, like just looking at it from like a bigger picture, all this AP hype, all these rankings, it used to be traditionally when we were growing up, it actually meant something. What do we think these rankings even mean? I mean, to me personally, I don't want Ohio State to be ranked number one. I don't want them to have that target. I don't want, like, I'd rather them, anoint a new SEC team every week and then say, oh, they're the best now. Oh, well, the strength of schedule, or, try to logically break down why they think this team's more dominant when it's just, we're just getting into the season, and it's a long season. It's going to be week 7. So I guess overall, like, what are your guys' thoughts? I mean, this is a big year. This is a long season. It's a new season. I mean, are we at this point just most of these rankings are just a bunch of hype? Like, what do you think, Dylan? This is kind of a big, kind of a long-winded question I just asked there. So sorry about that.
I mean, from the moment that the college football playoff was implemented, so going back to 2014, when there was a playoff ranking, the AP poll by and large became obsolete. Like, it didn't matter anymore. And what most people always talked about with the AP poll is that, like, how do you rank these teams, this early in the season without having seen anything about them? Like, you have a preseason ranking, and so much of it's based off of preseason rankings. And that's just, and all that is based off of what you have coming back from a team and whatever that team did last year. So, as far as the AP poll goes, I don't put a whole lot of stock into it. Now, it does matter. It does matter because it sets the stage for how far these teams have to move or how far they can fall after a loss and whatnot. Like, if people say the preseason poll, AP poll doesn't matter, that's bullshit. I mean, it does because, in general, that's where, teams are going to be ranked, assuming they keep on winning, they're going to be ranked in the college football playoff, that first poll. So if you're in the top 5, and you happen to lose a game, well, you're not going to fall out of the top 15. But if you were top, 15, say 14 or 15 in that AP poll, and you lose a game, now you're looking at, potentially dropping out of the top 25. So it does matter. But in terms of, who's ranked one. Look, I've always said this before, and I'm a firm believer. Like, I don't buy into the, don't make Ohio State the top ranked team or whatnot, because when you're Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, these teams, it doesn't matter if you're the top ranked team or the 4th or 5th or 6th ranked team. These teams couldn't want to beat you any more than they already do because of who you are and what you've done and the standard you are in that conference. So, that doesn't bother me that much, but like I said, in general, I mean, it's a wild year. It's interesting because given this is the first year of this 12-team playoff, I'm glad to see that we're going to have some chaos so we can start to get an immediate insight, a window into how losses are going to affect teams, because that was a big question this year. I was like, does a 2-loss team get in the playoff? Could a 3-loss team potentially even get in the playoff? It's one of those at large as well. We need to see a lot of these teams lose in order to start getting these pictures and getting ideas of what's going to happen. And we just took a big step in that last night. So I'm kind of glad to see the chaos from that aspect, because I want to see just what it's going to take to get into this playoff. And if you would have had 5, 6 undefeated or 1-loss teams that are very clearly your top 5 or 6, in that final playoff poll, we wouldn't have gotten as quite the picture into what that's going to look like. So I'm excited from that standpoint.
How about you, Andy?
Well, I got to throw a shout out to my boy Jeremy Royer. And Mr. Royer said something to me and a fellow friend in the text thread last night about this very subject. And this is something that he and I, and even us to a certain extent, have talked about. And does it, first of all, does a ranking matter? Yes and no, because the top 4 teams in the playoff are still your Power 4 conference championship game winners, right? So let's say, just for argument's sake right now, Alabama loses 2 more games this season. I know that is insane to think about. They could be a 3-loss Alabama team, but let's just say for kicks and giggles and fun, they lose 2 more games. But the way that the SEC is going right now, everybody's beating up on each other. Let's say 3 losses still gets them into the conference championship game, and they're technically ranked outside of the College Football Playoff Committee's top 12, but they go and win the SEC with 3 losses. Well, now a 3-loss Alabama team is one of the top 4 seeded teams in the playoff. So does ranking matter? Yes. For those teams that are going to be on the outside looking in, that did not win their conference championship game, then the ranking does come into play. But in a sense, it doesn't, at least for the Power 4 conferences right now. A ranking kind of almost does not matter. Once again, though, unless you're on the verge of trying to get in and you don't win your conference championship game, then yeah, obviously a ranking is going to matter at that point. But like a loss yesterday by Alabama, this is where I'm throwing props to my boy Jeremy. He was like, in the grand scheme of things, this loss may not matter. Once again, going back to the argument that if Alabama goes and wins the SEC, that loss to Vandy completely does not matter. And to his point, and I think a lot of people out there thought this, especially when the 12-team playoff was implemented, you're no longer going to see an undefeated team win the national championship. I think not to say it's never going to happen, but I think the odds are stacked against a team going at least 16 games undefeated in college football. I don't think that it's as realistic as, it was fairly unrealistic when LSU did it in 2019 with our boy Joey B leading the LSU Tigers to a 15-0 season, having one of the greatest single seasons in college football history for a quarterback. But ultimately, yeah, does a ranking matter? Yes and no. But I think that what we saw yesterday is not going to necessarily hinder teams from getting in. But the fact that both Tennessee and Alabama lost, Georgia's now got a loss, but that one loss to Alabama, who lost to Vandy. I mean, you could throw all of those. Well, they lost to them, but they lost here, and these guys and that, and they beat them, and blah, blah, blah. Ultimately, I think Ohio State is sitting pretty. I think that what they have done, they are looking like the most dominant team in the country. Okay. Have they played a Georgia yet? No. But the way that they have handled their business right now, Ohio State, as far as I'm concerned, is sitting in the driver's seat.
2 things real quick. One, if you start looking at the way some of these playoff scenarios play out, and it's not just after yesterday, this has been the case since they announced the 12-team formula or the format. There are going to be a lot of years where being that 5th seed and the first at-large seed is going to be a better path to a national title than being a conference champion and being in those top 4 with the bye. There'll be plenty of years where being that 5th seed and having to play, that opening round game would still be a better path given who you will play than being in that top 4 and having that first round bye. So, but as far as this year goes, Alabama and Tennessee play in 2 weeks. One of those 2 teams is going to be a 2-loss team by the time we get to mid-October. And again, the questions about will 2-loss teams make the playoff? Yes, they will. Probably plenty of years they will make that. Could a 3-loss team ever make it? I don't know. But one of those 2 teams is going to be a loss away from finding out immediately in year 1 if a 3-loss team could realistically make the playoff, because one of those 2 teams is going to have 2 losses in just a couple more weeks. Yeah, very interesting stuff for sure that happened yesterday. And it would be fascinating to see how that continues to play out.
Yesterday was funny because looking at it on paper, going into the weekend, I'm kind of like, nah, nah, nah. Alabama, Vanderbilt, nah. Texas A&M, Missouri, it's a two top, 25 ranked. That's probably the best game on the schedule. Tennessee at Arkansas. You look at, Miami at Cal. You look at these games on paper, and I would say yesterday, this past weekend, however you want to say it, was probably the most exciting weekend that we've seen yet in the college football season. So it just goes to show you that even though on paper it says one thing, the outcome completely different.
Yeah, I agree, and I think just go back to OSU being in the driver's seat. They get Oregon, and then they just looking at their schedule, they play Oregon, then they play Nebraska, then they play Penn State.
They got a gauntlet.
Nebraska knocked off Rutgers. Nebraska's staying a one-loss team, so that's exciting. I think it's good for the Buckeyes to play. For the Big Ten teams to keep these good records. So OSU's inevitably, they win next week and they're going to be ranked number 1, knocking off.
They're without a doubt in the driver's seat if they win.
Yeah,
against Oregon.
Yeah,
the winner of next week's game's in the driver's seat, in my opinion.
Dylan, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's it.
Just looking forward to next week. I think it's going to be a good game. It's tough to see in. It's going to be tough to play in Oregon, and it's in
awesome
Eugene,
awesome.
yeah.
The zoo.
But I still think that. I think if OSU just handles business, it's going to be fun. Even if it's a close game. I just think that we can control the clock. Our defense makes big plays. I don't think Oregon's defense is as dominant as ours is. I don't think their offense is as high powered, but that's a big, just looking at yesterday, not to fast forward to the Screw the Blue segment, Michigan playing in Washington. It is a cool environment. It's a tough environment to go out West, I think, play those night games out West in the old school Pac-12 style football games. So I think it's going to be a fun game. But I think, OSU, I don't see them losing to Oregon, but I don't think, I just think if we just keep handling our business, things are going to be fine. So Andy, do you want to go to the Screw the Blue segment right now?
Yeah, let's do that. And then we'll talk Oregon to wind it up.
Okay. Sounds good. So yesterday, Michigan goes into Washington. It's a big deal. Beautiful stadium, and I'm like, why is Bill Belichick on the side? Because I really haven't paid attention to Washington. Then I see both Pete Carroll and Bill Belichick on the sideline just hanging out, and I was like, that's interesting. And then it was like, wait, the one guy's son is the offensive coordinator, the other's the defensive coordinator, which is kind of exciting. That was kind of interesting to see. I guess I really don't. It doesn't mean that they're coaching, but it's I don't know. It's just kind of funny just growing up with those two dudes just dominating for years. Pete Carroll won the last AP poll national championship and split it with LSU that one year, which is, it's just still kind of funny. Is that even a real title? But anyway, Michigan goes in. I was thinking, they were pulling away. They put that Tuttle guy in. They can finally throw the ball, throws a pick. And I'm like, oh, that's tough, man. But I think they're still going to be able to move the ball. And then he just continues to make mistakes, and Michigan just melts down and just really shows just really how far they've fallen off in the rematch of the national championship. To me, it was a pretty embarrassing loss for Michigan because I don't think Washington's that – they're definitely not as good as they were. They're nowhere near as good as they were last year. Neither is Michigan. But I felt like their defense didn't look that tough. They continue to just not be able to move the ball. And it's just really painful. And it's just kind of like, I'm always the type of OSU fan that wants Michigan to be the best. So when we beat them, it means more. But at the same time, after all the crap they've talked the last few years, it is nice to see them wear some egg on their face. So, Andy, I know you're just chomping at the bit to say, screw the blue. Michigan stinks.
I'm going to defer to Dylan because, yes, I have a feeling I'm going to ramble for a few minutes. So, Dylan, I'll defer to you. I'll let you start off if you have anything to say. If not, I'll take over and I'll start rambling away. But please go ahead first, sir.
Yeah, I'm not going to do any dancing on the grave, but just a general assessment of Michigan. Look, that's you said it, Drew. That's a Washington team that's not very good. That's a 4 or 5 loss Washington team this year waiting to happen. And look, Michigan was an underdog in that game, so Vegas knew what was going on. Somehow Michigan remained a top 10 football team, despite what we all saw. But Vegas knew because that was a top 10 underdog going out there to a 2-loss Washington team. To say it's a bad loss, I think it's just on par with where Michigan's at right now, because that offense is that bad. They put Jack Tuttle in there, but Jack Tuttle hasn't played up to this point for a reason, which is just says everything about that quarterback situation. They've tried everything, in the preseason or during camp. At one point, everybody assumed it was Alex Orji's job to lose. Then he started hearing rumblings about, Jack Tuttle all of a sudden. Then it was Davis Warren who started the season. They go back to Orji. Now Jack Tuttle gets a shot finally, and while Jack Tuttle has the best arm of the group for sure, he's still mistake prone, and there's still a reason why he's been in college football since 2002, and why he's just now getting a shot, at Michigan. So that's just a lost cause offense. We know that they still have a couple of capable running backs. Saw that at flashes last night, but being that one-dimensional, as we saw with Iowa, you're just not going to be anybody worth their salt whatsoever being that one-dimensional. So Michigan will lose a couple more times this year. We all knew that. We figured that after the Texas game when they got exposed for what they were offensively. It's a lost cause, and I know there's a lot of stuff people throwing this out on Twitter about will Michigan just go ahead and impose their self-impose their bowl ban now, just because the season's a lost cause anyways, and get that out of the way. It's a joke now. It makes you wonder, it would probably be good business for them. So it makes you wonder, but I tell you, if they did that, that'd be one of the, most chicken shit things I've seen since they tucked tail and ran in 2020, and canceled that game. So,
I think they find a way to cancel the game this year.
Nah, that's not gonna happen. But still, yeah, it would be the most chicken shit stuff I've seen for a long time. So, those guys are dead and done. And one more thing I might add, and I'll let you get at it, Andy, because I know you're just sprawling over there. I said this in the offseason, not that I was the only one. I've never seen a national champion fail to capture momentum worse than Michigan after their national championship. It's whether it be recruiting, they've seen no boost in recruiting from winning a national title. People forgot about it immediately. People, if anybody did talk about it outside of Ann Arbor, it was about the fact that maybe it'll be vacated and whatnot. And now here you are, in the first year of Sharon Moore's tenure at Michigan, and they've got no momentum whatsoever coming out of that national title. And I've just never seen it before. And that's not a knock on Michigan or anything. I've just never seen it before. I've never seen a team fail to capture momentum after a national title. They've got nothing coming from that national title. They won it, and I don't think any part of me believes it'll ever be vacated, so it'll be theirs forever. But in terms of what it meant moving forward in the program, they had no momentum coming out of that, and it's just crazy to see.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that, I think the only momentum they got was favoritism in the polling to stay in a higher thing, and then their biggest win was USC, and USC just lost a really bad Minnesota team yesterday. Which
there's another upset week.
Yeah, that I totally forgot about.
Yeah.
And it's just I gotta look, but the new Pac-12 teams outside of Oregon that are the legacy Pac-12 teams are really not doing that good in the Big Ten. So Andy, sorry, here we go.
You're all right. You're all right, buddy. Hey, this is all I gotta say, Dillon. Na 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 na. The old Pee Wee dance. Keep dancing on their grave, baby. What you just said, Dillon, totally encapsulates where Michigan is at. And of course, why did Michigan not gain any momentum? I mean, obviously the cheating scandal, all that kind of stuff, the fact that there was talk that they might get wins vacated. They might even get the natty vacated, all that kind of stuff. That had to play into a huge part in their recruiting. And kids are probably like, thank you, Michigan, for the offer, but I'm going to go somewhere else. I think that all of that talk, without a doubt, hindered their recruiting. But Drew, you said at the beginning of this segment that you always wanted Michigan to be their best, because ultimately, if Ohio State beats a highly ranked Michigan team, it looks better for Ohio State. And I was that way for years. I was. Am I still that way now? I'm 50-50. I'm on the fence, because once again, I think that the 12-team playoff, it's thrown some of these things out the window, where beating a highly ranked team, yeah, it still makes your team look better. It still is going to look better in the eyes of an overall ranking in the event that you don't win your conference, and now you're relying on the committee to make you one of the top 12 teams. So obviously, big wins still matter to a certain extent. But ultimately, if you're in a Power 4 conference, you win the conference, boom, bang, bip, who the hell cares? You're in. But am I not reveling right now in Michigan's misery? Oh, God, yes, I am just reveling in it. I love it. This is great. This is grand, wonderful. They're just a shell of themselves. They're an absolute shell of themselves. Like you said, Dillon, they have failed to capture any sort of momentum. Even with all the guys that left and the recruiting not being great, you still see teams that are coming off of a national championship at least ride that wave, that momentum a little bit. And I mean, Michigan very well could be 2-3 right now. Hell, they could almost be 1-4 because of the crap that happened against Minnesota. Now, would Minnesota have gone down and kicked a game-tying field goal and taken it into overtime and won? That's conjecture. But still, the way that Minnesota got screwed on that onside kick, I mean, screwed by Michigan in those refs. Not necessarily Michigan, but the refs. Michigan, who knows what could have happened in that game. The USC game, freaking Michigan, Higgins, whatever that guy, I think it's Kalel Huggins, rips off a crazy run within like the last 2 minutes of the game, takes it all the way down into USC territory, and is able to get the game-winning score from there. So I think right now the fact that, and I said 1-4, is more like 2-4, because Michigan's 4-2. I mean, they very well could be 2-4 right now. I think they've benefited from some luck, but the fact that they do just look like a shell of their former selves. I mean, their offense is obviously just pathetic offense. And their defense is obviously nowhere near where it has been the last couple of seasons. So yeah. Come on, Pee-wee. The ghost of Paul Rubens lives within me forever. So
that schedule, they still have Illinois,
and they still got bangers. They still got bangers.
And Indiana, and even Indiana on that schedule. So that has 4 losses written all over it. And who knows? If they lose another game, that could go south in a hurry in terms of buy-in from guys, and it could just get really ugly. So, but that has 4 losses written all over it. Michigan will certainly be sizable underdogs in both those Oregon and Ohio State games. And to say that they couldn't drop the Indiana or Illinois game, I don't think anybody would say that either. So, and it's a 5-loss season waiting to happen, which is crazy following a national title. And what they brought back. I know they lost a decent amount too, but they still had guys that they were counting on, that were our future NFL draft picks. And look, that defensive line's still really good. It's still very good. Mason Graham is an absolute game wrecker. Dude's a badass.
Will Johnson too.
Yeah, Will Johnson. Although, sometimes
he didn't look good yesterday, man.
Exactly. But
grab that dude's face mask.
He's going to be a first-round corner for sure. So I mean, there's still a good amount of talent there despite all that they lost. And to say that this is a 4 or 5 loss team waiting to happen out, a year after a national title is just it's crazy. It's going to get loud very early for Sharon Warren up there. It's going to. This is I understand why Michigan handed the keys to him, but everything that happened with the contract and whatnot, they seem very non-committal to Sharon Moore and whatnot. Whether that was because of what's pending with the sanctions and whatnot, or I don't know. But with everything that happened in that contract, they finally got it finalized. But it's going to get loud early for Sherrone Moore up there when this team loses 4 or 5 games this year, and they have no, they can't even look to the future and say like, well, the recruiting's there, so they'll build it back up. Right now, the recruiting's not there to suggest they'll build it back up. And I know Michigan people love to say like, well, we develop here, and we don't need it because we'll develop these guys here and whatnot. And that was true to some degree with Harbaugh there and whatnot. Newsflash: Sherrone Moore is not Jim Harbaugh. He doesn't have a fraction of the coaching record or track record that Jim Harbaugh has. So to suggest that they're just going to be able to develop without having elite recruiting classes is it's just folly. I don't know what Michigan fans have to look forward to right now. But it's kind of bleak right now.
Very bleak, and it's pretty fun as an OSU fan, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think you said it, Drew, just because of what Buckeye Nation went through the last 3 seasons. It's hard to root for Michigan to be good right now, especially with them coming off a natty and all the cheating aside. And I know there are people out there going, see what happens? All the cheaters left. And this is the result. You guys you're struggling. I think it's also because they lost a lot of upperclassmen, and Michigan, they had good football teams, cheating aside. But I think a lot of people in Buckeye Nation are, regardless of all that, very happy to see the smelly rodents lose.
Look.
Because this is, I don't care if Michigan is 4-7 going into the game. If Buckeye Nation just wants to see Ohio State stomp the ever-living crap out of the rodents, and they do that regardless of how good or bad Michigan is. Buckeye Nation's going to be happy.
I would never tell anybody how to root, obviously, not at all. But I've never understood the whole notion of rooting for Michigan to be good, and so that it's a better game when they get there. Like I mean, point blank, I was raised to hate Mason Blue as much as I love Startling Gray. Like Peter, like that's no joke. I mean, I was raised to hate Michigan as much as I loved Ohio State football. Like it was just 1A and 1B. So the thought of ever rooting for them on a given Saturday, and look, the way I root doesn't impact the game anyways. The game's going to happen the way it goes. So whether I root against them or not, I can acknowledge at the end of the year, like, oh, Michigan's 11-0 coming into that game, or 10-1, and it's a top 10 football game or a top 5. That's great for the game. I can acknowledge that, but I'll be damned if I'd ever root for them along the way to get there. Because it's going to happen. Whatever happens anyways. And I would never root for anything good to happen in a Michigan fan's life, sports wise. So, but anyways,
and trust me, Dillon, I was raised the exact same way too. I mean, my dad, I'm the biggest Ohio State fan. But I mean, the way I was raised, my dad seriously was the guy that like, hey, Doug, who's this guy on Ohio State again? Oh, well, he's a 6'3", 230-pounder out of, Centerville, Ohio, and high school coach. I mean, he could sit here and tell you the dumbest stats on guys. That's how big of a fan my dad was. He knew height, weight, hometown, high school coaches, all that kind of stuff. So I was definitely raised the same way. But I got to admit, it started getting to the point where Ohio State beating Michigan was getting kind of boring. I know. I know. I can't believe I just said that. Buckeye fans, go ahead and rake me over the coals and roast me over the fire.
Well,
I said that, but it was getting to a point where Ohio State beating Michigan almost, to me personally, and I'm sure a lot of people out there feel completely different. They probably already clicked off the podcast and they quit listening because they're so enraged that I would let such blasphemy come out of my mouth. But it was almost starting to feel like Ohio State was beating at times Northwestern, Indiana. The fact that they were not just beating Michigan, but beating Michigan handily some of those years. So Michigan doing what they did absolutely 100% put the rage back into Buckeye fans, I think, because even though, yes, it was great to see Ohio State beat Michigan, if you see the same team beating the other team year in and year out, it is going to, that rivalry is slowly going to dissolve. And it was starting to dissolve a little bit. Michigan winning the last 3 years, once again, all the outside crap aside, put the fire back into the belly of Buckeye Nation, because I can guarantee you there isn't a Buckeye fan out there that is any more enraged and pissed off at Michigan right now than they were 3 years ago, 4 years ago. I can guarantee you they feel more hatred now for the smelly rodents than they did before 2021.
With that being said, screw the blue. All right, we got next week. So at this point, the number one team in the nation lost. Number 2, Texas 5-0. Number 3, Ohio State 5-0. Number 4, Tennessee lost. Number 5, Georgia. You think? I mean, I guess Georgia's going to stay ahead of Oregon after their win. So what it looks like, OSU, it's going to be number 2 versus, I don't know, number 4.
Yeah, 2 and 4 probably is the most likely.
Yeah, so 2 and 4, pretty big game. I mean, probably one of the biggest in-season games we've had against the in-conference play in recent times. It's not a Michigan game. Dillon, what are your kind of takeaways for next week? What do you think? What do you think the Buckeyes need to do to win? How do you think? Do you think it's going to be business as usual? The Buckeyes just make some big defensive plays. Do you think it's going to be a barn burner?
Well, the first thing I'll say is we're about to learn a lot about whether or not Ohio State has a linebacker problem. Sonny Styles played really well yesterday, and I was happy for him because he's taken a lot of heat recently for his play, and rightfully so. He hasn't played well. Just hasn't looked comfortable with the position, which I know is not crazy to believe because, it's a brand new position to him and it's not an easy transition. I get all that. But he hadn't played well. He played really well yesterday, but I also thought it was a game where it was tailor-made for him to play well because it was a lot of 3 linebacker sets. It was a team that was running the ball right at you, so he could just play downhill and attack the line of scrimmage, and I think that suits Sonny well. Next week's a whole different animal because he's going to have to run sideline to sideline against this Oregon offense. And if he's a guy who's out of position a lot, those 5-yard gains are going to end up being chunk yardage against Oregon because of both, the running to sideline and also the athletes that Oregon has. So I think it's a big week to figure out if Ohio State's, if they're good enough in the middle of that defense to go win a national championship, as it's currently, as their personnel currently sits. With that being said, what I saw from Ohio State's running game yesterday leads me to believe that if all else fails in a raucous environment out there and it's going to be lit, I'm so excited to get out there. I've been wanting to see Awesome for a long time, and for this kind of atmosphere, it's going to be the real deal. But if all else fails, Ohio State's going to be able to run the football next Saturday, and I think that's just, such a comforting thing. I mentioned this earlier in the show. And if Ohio State can run the football and control the clock and control the line of scrimmage and just kind of dictate the pace of this game and whatnot, I really like Ohio State's chances. And look, a week ago, gun to my head, pick it. I probably would have picked Oregon. I don't know what Ohio State's going to be favored. I know they opened up as a
3.5 right now.
3.5. I'd be surprised if that doesn't go up a point, to be honest with you. But just, picking the game a week or so ago, man, I probably would have, in a very good football game, picked Oregon. But after seeing the way Ohio State ran the football against a really good front yesterday, I just think that they're going to go out there and be able to run the ball. And with the playmakers they have in the passing game, they'll be able to do enough in the passing game off of that to dictate the game. And I think Ohio State's defensive line will do enough to force Dillon Gabriel to have to throw the football down the field. Is that best suited, for Oregon to go win that football game if he has to throw the ball 50 times? I don't know, but I think he will to have a chance to win that game Saturday. And we'll see. Maybe he reannounces himself in the way that he did last year in the Cotton Bowl, that he's, one of the better, quarterbacks in the country. But I just don't believe that that's the best way for Oregon to go win a football game. But I think he's going to have to. And I just like Ohio State's front, offensive and defensive lines in both those matchups, and I think that's enough to win the football game. So I'm pretty confident about Ohio State. Where I don't want to say I wasn't confident, but it was waning, a week or so ago. But after seeing what I saw last week or yesterday, I'm pretty confident Ohio State going out there and getting it because of that run game.
Yeah, I think too. What I'm trying to find some Oregon defensive stats, like how they ranking in defense and like who they've played.
I've got them.
You've got him. All right, Andy, you go then.
Yeah. So I mean, on paper, you look at, and I actually, Dylan, I'm kind of the opposite of you. The way that Oregon started this season and the way that they've now played the last couple of games, at first I'm like, oh, this might be a bloodbath in the zoo. Now I'm kind of like, okay, Oregon's starting to come around. They're starting to turn into the team that everybody was expecting to start the season. Took them a few minutes for the car to warm up. The engine's definitely warm, and it's revving right now for the Ducks. Defensively, so that kind of gives me pause where they're at right now compared to where they were at the beginning of the season. And especially, Drew, after that conversation we had in passing, if you will, with someone down at the Woody who said that they couldn't wait for Ohio State to play Oregon because they knew what Ohio State had in comparison with the Ducks, and the Ducks did not match up at all with the Buckeyes, and they were eager to see that game being played because they knew that Ohio State is going to go out there and rip Oregon to shreds. That was not said whatsoever. That was me throwing that in there. But right now on paper, Oregon allowing 101 yards on the ground per game. You would like to think that if Ohio State was able to run for over 200 against an Iowa defense that was only allowing 61 yards per game, that they should be able to go out and do the same against the Ducks. But the team passing efficiency defense is where Oregon excels. They're one of the better team passing defenses in the country. In fact, they're ranked 10th against the pass right now, and they defend well. They'll get in there and they'll knock some balls down. In fact, they lead the Big Ten with 31 passes defended. Getting after the quarterback, they've actually got one less sack than the Buckeyes do. They've got 16. Buckeyes have got 17 on the year. Tackles for loss, Oregon doesn't necessarily get into the backfield a whole lot. They've got 27 tackles for loss. They've got 4 interceptions, but once again, they may not pick off the ball a lot, but they're going to defend the pass pretty well. I think Ohio State does have to play ball control. I think that Dillon, you hit the nail on the head. I think Ohio State having an effective rushing offense is ultimately going to win them the game. But if Oregon is able to win the battle in the trenches, stop Ohio State's run, and force Will Howard to throw, as we've seen, sometimes he's had a couple of questionable passes thrown. Well, he was having some questionable passes as far as I was concerned at the beginning of the year against Akron. I thought he was thrown into double coverage a little too much to my liking, or throwing to receivers who were covered. Yesterday, threw to a very well covered Emeka Egbuka that turned into an interception. Last weekend against Michigan State, throws into double coverage and it's intercepted. So if they can stop Ohio State's rushing attack and force Will Howard to throw, it might turn into a long game for Ohio State. But if Ohio State can effectively run the ball, I think this is going to be a banger, fellas. I think this is going to be one hell of a football game we're about to see. And it might even be number 2 versus number 3, because I would not doubt to see the AP jump Oregon over Georgia, simply because Oregon's undefeated and Georgia had a they had an okay win over Auburn yesterday. But this very well could be number 2, number 3. And that aside, regardless of the rankings, even, the stats, I think this is going to be one hell of a football game. And I think it's going to come down to who can run the ball more effectively on either side. And whoever wins the rushing battle and the time possession battle and the turnover battle is going to win the football game. Buckeyes, you said, are 3.5 point favorites right now.
Yeah.
It very well could come down to a field goal type situation.
I'm on the side of Dillon. I think the best team Oregon's played is Boise State. They got that awesome running back, and that's about it.
The best running back in the country.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
And it was a shootout. It was 37-34. and it was at home. So I think OSU is going to control the ball. I think they're going to go in there. They might take a little bit to adjust. They'll probably start out slow, but I wouldn't be surprised if they won by over 10 points. I think OSU's really good, and maybe I'm just a little bit buying into the hype a little bit, but just based on what I've seen, I mean, Oregon's pretty good at beating bad teams like UCLA and Michigan State, and Oregon State. But I think that I mean, I don't know, OSU, to say OSU's played better teams is kind of a stretch. Iowa, actually, I was taking a look. They kind of have the weakest schedule in the Big Ten this year. They don't really. OSU's really the only good team they play, which is interesting. So it'd be funny if Iowa ends up back in the Big Ten championship just based on their record. And
does Iowa not play Nebraska this year?
I don't think so, man. They don't really play.
I thought that's a protected rivalry. Maybe not.
I did too. Yeah,
maybe, but
they typically play. What is that for the?
That would be
Iowa, Rosedale.
Iowa State. Iowa State.
Iowa, Minnesota is the Florida Rosedale.
Yeah, so Iowa plays Washington, Michigan State, Northwestern, Wisconsin, UCLA, Maryland, and Nebraska. So they do play Nebraska the last game of the year.
Okay.
So, but I mean, comparing games, I just think that OSU has a lot more weapons. I think our defense is better. But it's in Eugene, so I mean, who knows? I think it's gonna be a great test. I think it's gonna be a great game. I'm looking forward to it. But I would say OSU wins. I don't see them. I'd be surprised if they lost, but if they did lose, I mean, I don't know. We'll see what happens, man. I'm you know me. We'll see. But I'm pretty confident in the Buckeyes. I think we do got the gauntlet. We go into Penn State this year, right? So I think that's going to be a tougher game, but OSU schedule's looking to be a lot tougher than we thought it would be. So that's good news. That's it. Besides that, there's some other games around that are pretty good. Not as good as we thought they were going to be earlier in the year, but LSU and Ole Miss. So that's another one-loss SEC team. So more teams are going to fall. So, but besides that, should be another great weekend of football. It's been pretty fun this year. Really fun to watch. When it seemed like it was starting out really slow and it was kind of boring, and now it's just like hitting 100 miles an hour really quick, which is fun. So, but that's it for me on my end. What are you writing about, Dylan? What's your next article going to be about?
I'm not entirely sure. I wrote something about Emeka last night, or I guess this morning while I was finishing watching that Miami game. Not sure what's next. A lot of it depends on who we get on Wednesday, so it's hard to write stories without, being able to talk to people about these guys and getting quotes from them and ask them the things we want to ask. So, yeah, we'll see. But yeah, I wrote about Emeka just as like everybody's talking about now, just as a reminder that, hey, Emeka's really freaking good. I know Jeremiah's been special, probably the best I've ever seen at Ohio State right now. I'm not saying he'll have the best career. He still has to continue to put up those numbers, but he just talent-wise best I've ever seen. But man, Emeka Puka's really, really freaking good when he's healthy, and obviously he's fully healthy this year. So wrote about that, and we'll see what's next.
Andy, what do you got?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. We'll see who they bring out for our Wednesday at the Woody. But yeah, that was one thing I asked Mecca last night, Dylan, was, hey, do you kind of feel like maybe you're, kind of hanging back in the shadows a little bit? You're kind of been a forgotten guy, if you will. And, he gave the obligatory response like, yeah, I don't care about stats. I just want to win, all that kind of stuff. But his response was pretty cool. And of course, did I get it on video? Nope, I sure as hell didn't. So nonetheless, though, yeah, Mech was a guy I was thinking about writing about today as well. But as far as the Oregon game, I mean, there's going to be so much to write about. But are either team, players, coaches from either team going to give you any sort of tackling fuel? Probably not, you know what I mean? So unlike Caleb Johnson, who came out and kind of gave the Ohio State defense a little bit of tackling fuel to rev them up, in some of the comments he made beforehand. I don't think we're going to get that out of Oregon. And if we do, oh boy, look out. This is going to get interesting. You ain't going to hear it from any Ohio State players.
No.
They're too well groomed by our guy, Jerry Emig and Mike Bassford, the SIDs over there at Ohio State. They're way too well groomed by those dudes to come out and give a silly answer to ignite the fire that's already I'm sure been lit underneath Oregon's butts, as it has been under Ohio State's butts. So yeah, nothing in particular, but regardless, I'm looking forward to writing about a couple of different things, obviously an Oregon preview or whatever, and hopefully get some good interviews for our Wednesday at the Woody.
Absolutely. Well, all right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us. Give us all a follow on Twitter. Dillon, how can people follow you on Twitter? What's your X? How can people slash you on X?
At Dillon, Dillon, Davis 56. So yeah, absolutely follow along. I have posted a lot of videos from Wednesdays and whatnot. So if you can put up with some, Boston sports takes, then
Boo! No, I'm just kidding.
I think I'm pretty good following. So.
And it's at Andy is Wired.
Once again, Drew, you're completely wrong. I think now you're just saying
Andy's Wired. At Andy's Wired. At
okay.
Andy's Wired.
Slash me on the X at Andy's Wired, of course.
And I'm
at Columbus_Wired for the Columbus Wired X account. Yes.
And I'm at Drew Sample. Give us a follow. Share the show. And we appreciate you guys. We'll bring you another episode soon.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you, brother.